Mmusi, thanks indeed for talking to us. This court ruling, it must be a setback for your case, Mmusi?
No, I think that the courts, we were never wanting to interdict the schools. What we are wanting to do is exactly the point you've made, which is supervisory, which is to ask that actually all schools are safe, which is to ask and make sure that actually there isn't a differentiation between wealthy schools and poor schools in who can open first, and that in fact there must be rationality tested in whether or not we can allow our kids to be traveling as sardines and to go into classrooms of over 60. So that the court has deemed it not urgent isn't a massive setback for us. It just means that for us the process begins at the High Court, where we will then be taking the matter forward to fight to ensure that actually, in this instance, our kids can go to safe places to learn. We still maintain the argument is valid. The court didn't consider the argument because at this point in time, as the hotline and the messages have been coming through, people are telling us their schools are not ready. They're telling us that, in fact, that there's still in some schools no toilets, no sanitation, no PPEs. And therefore, we must ask the genuine questions as South Africans. Whose child must die first before we realize that the schools are unsafe for many of our learners?
Now, that's perfectly understandable, but you obviously considered your case to be one that carried enough weight for the Constitutional Court to be adjudicating this, and that didn't happen.
No, completely, because in this instance, our argument still maintains about the constitutionality of the rights of a child. That's why we felt to begin at the apex court. And now that that argument has been put down, as in the same as the Khoza case that has been sent to a lower court, we don't have a problem with that, and therefore we're comfortable enough to know that as these regulations have been promulgated and our kids have been forced to go back to schools that many of them are unsafe, we're happy to test the matter in the High Court.
Mr. Maimane, I want to ask you this. I mean, you increasingly have health experts, and one of them being Shabir Mahdi, a professor in vaccinology, even telling us a few hours ago that there are a few cases where children have died, but they did not succumb exactly to COVID-19. There has to be a biological association of the death to the disease, and supposedly this is suggesting that children are at far lower risk than we believe. How do you reconcile some of those findings?
Well, here's a simple challenge. Whilst I respect the advice of health professionals and scientists, we're dealing in uncharted territory here. And so, yes, we can, on the basis of a recent history, speculate that these are kids are not carriers. But when we talk about matriculants, we're talking about 16, 17, 18-year-olds. We're talking about the number of the 400,000 teachers that have to go back to work, who many of them have underlying can have underlying conditions. We are also discussing communities where each of these kids come from. Because if, of course, the argument is made for wealthy schools, sure, they travel in smaller vehicles with just their parents and they get to school. That's not the debate. It's about the kids who are in taxis, who are being transported in sardines, who are walking to schools in groups, who are young adults by the time they get to matric, and more seriously, are going back to the same community. That's the concern that we ought to be looking at. And whilst I respect the Pediatric Society in its argument about children in primary school, I think we must look at the broader function of education and the interconnectedness that it has with our community.
How does your school's hotline ahead of the reopening now fit into all of this? And how do you see the academic year unfolding?
We've proposed that, in fact, the academic year must be adjusted so that we can deal with the remaining aspects of it. Curriculum is something that is prescribed by the department. We can make a decision as to what is essential for promotion. And we are arguing that for grade 12, we can incorporate some of their grade 11 marks and use that as a function of promotion. And we can do likewise for grade 7s. And then if we then move on to the rest of the other academic aspects, there's no challenge in readjusting the curriculum, loading the additional subjects that are being missed out to the following year, and knowing that in 2021 we can have an extended academic year with aspects of catch-up being built into it.
All right, we're going to leave it there. Mmusi Maimane there from the One South Africa movement. Thanks indeed for talking to us.